Hello everyone and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today's video, we're going to be looking at the pros and cons of starting with various Warhammer Age of Sigmar armies. We did a video not too long ago talking about the 5 best and worst Warhammer Age of Sigmar armies to get started with in the game, and we got asked by a lot of people to talk about the rest of the armies in the comment section of that video, so we thought we'd do videos talking about all of the armies. For now, we've done a bunch of videos talking about all the other Grand Alliances, and we've also done a video talking about Order, but not including the Elves. Order has so many different factions within that Grand Alliance, we decided to split it up. So we've got an Order video that features everything that's not an Elf in it, and now we've got a video dedicated especially to Elves. So if you want to get started with one of the many different Warhammer Age of Sigmar Elf factions, we're going to go through some criteria we look at for what we think makes them a great army to start with, and just talk about it. I mean, no army is ever a bad army to start with if you love the models, so that's definitely something to keep in mind throughout this whole video. Just take the negatives that we say about an army in this more as warnings and things to be aware of when you're getting into that army, to not have them unexpectedly arise on you and sort of sour your taste upon the army that you like the most. With that said, let's look at the criteria first, and then we'll get into talking about all the armies. And so here is our criteria. First of all, we think an army is easy to get into if it has a start collecting box or a similar easy point of entry, like a starter set box. This, of course, makes these armies easy to get into. It gives you a bunch of models at a cheaper discount, and also just gives you a force right out that first box you purchase. There are also other ways that come around like this, like the Battle Force boxes for Christmas that come out each year that you can find that are easy to get into an army with, though these are temporary stock products, much like launch boxes and jewel boxes that come out at various times throughout the year. We want to make sure that the model count of the army is not massive either. There is something to be said about the quantity just making an army harder to get into. This will not only up the cost of the army, but also require you to spend more time painting the force to get it on the tabletop nice and painted. The cost of the army, as mentioned, goes up from model count, but also some armies just are more expensive. The models are more expensive, and if they lack things like a star collecting box or easy point of entry, they generally do have the cost of the army raise up quite a lot. Lack of summoning also affects the cost, because if we don't have any summoning, we're not having to buy summoning units. So this is definitely a bonus. If an army doesn't have summoning, it instantly becomes easier to access for a brand new player in the game. Painting skills are another one we like to look at, because with painting an army, you want to have an army that's easy to paint for a new player, that they can learn new skills along the way painting up that army, but don't require advanced painting skills or, I guess, ability to start off the force with. With the painting skills, quantity definitely has something to do with this as well, as mentioned, so you don't want to paint 200 troops. That's just as hard as painting 10 highly detailed miniatures. Multiple ways to play the army is also important. Being able to use those models in different sort of playstyles is important, and also having a wide range of models inside said faction to allow you to go and play different parts of the force is useful as well. Ease of play as well is another massive one. We don't want an army that's bogged down with hundreds and hundreds of special rules, so we want the war scrolls to be simple and the army rules to be simple for a basic starter army. And lastly, competitiveness. This isn't the most important one. If you love an army, none of this matters, but it is important to understand where your army stands competitively, because it may not be the most competitive army in the game, and if all your friends have really competitive armies and you do not bring a competitive army to the table, you might find your chances of winning are maybe not as high, and you may find you lose more than you win. It's just important to know where you stand with armies in this sense, so that you can go and get and help and learn along with that army and understand where your place is inside the meta. First up, we have the Daughters of Khaine. Daughters of Khaine are probably one of the better elf armies to get started with. The Star Collecting Box is certainly useful, although it's definitely not a multiple purchase Star Collecting Box, unlike some of the other armies available in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. The starter box does give you the snakes, which are definitely the cheaper, more elite version of the army, and it gives you a bunch of characters inside that initial box set, but you're probably never going to pick up more than 2 of this box set for your first army in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. You can later, as there are lots of different options to build out of that initial starter box, especially the kit that comes with the Cauldron of Blood. You can build so many different variations of that kit, but the snakes in there are a dual kit, so you can get either the bow or combat snakes out of that box as you see fit. The cool thing about this, though, is that the army model count does drop if you start with this particular way. There are ways that the army definitely has more models. Playing with a Witch Elf or Sister of Slaughter heavy army will definitely up the amount of models in your army, but though not massively. You will never reach, like that 100 model mark too easily in many lists if you've got all the pieces there. Cost of the army can be quite expensive depending on how you go. While the bow snakes are much more elite, and you're not going to spend as much money if you're going into a Witch Elf or Sister Slaughter army, you're going to spend a lot more money, and they generally are one of the most expensive armies to buy in the game if you're going down that route. The lack of summoning is really nice. There's a few little odd corner cases where you can summon like a unit or so to the table through some various means, but nothing like that's going to massively affect how you play the game. You've just got a very basic sort of list and some very minimal summoning options. Painting skills for the army. The army, there's a lot of skin and a lot of scale on a bunch of different models, so contrast and dry brushing techniques can work really well to get the army painted to a very basic level done. But also with the army, you've got some really detailed miniatures in there as well. If you want to take the time to paint and do some really interesting things, you've certainly got the option to explore and grow your painting techniques throughout the army. The army does have multiple ways to play. As we've already mentioned, you have the elite snake build and you have the witch elf build, and you can also play in the middle with a mix. There's also particular sub-factions that work well with different types of, parts of the army. So you can play with witch elves, or slaughter, and there's certain factions that benefit both of those as well. Easy to play with Daughters of Cain. It does have a little bit of tricks to work out with it, and it is very buff heavy. So it's realizing that combinations it plays with along with characters and units nearby that's really important to understanding how this army plays. It's definitely not overly complex, but it is not the most basic army in the game, without a doubt. Competitiveness, this army is solidly competitive. The bow snake build and the bow and all of that sort of stuff, all the snakes and stuff, make this army really easy to play. And then a witch elf build, just run forward and murder stuff. It's a fun, simple army to play, and it's good on the tabletop. Next up, we have the Aelves Deepkin. They've got a start collecting box that is pretty decent, gives you Thralls and Eels, both of which are solid core foundations to your army. However, you're definitely not going to want to pick up many more of the Soul Render, though if you can find this box at a discount, it's definitely worth picking up, as you can generally get that Soul Render almost entirely paid for. And you can use him as some cool other models throughout the army to make some cool conversions if you really want to. But the starting collecting box is a good way to get into the force. Model count for the army can vary, even with Thrall heavy builds, though it's not going to be an awfully big horde army, and Eels are a very elite style army. Along with some monsters, you can have a really minimal model army. The cost of the army is interesting because it can change depending on what you want. Like I said, the start collecting box isn't necessarily the best value one in the game, and the character you're definitely not wanting multiple of, but Eels and Thralls aren't the most expensive kits to buy in the game, so you're going to have a bit of a middling sort of cost for your army. The lack of summoning is really useful though, and this does lower the cost. Generally, elves do cost a little bit more in all these new elf styles, but the fact that you don't have to buy summoning definitely helps the army stop from being that over egregious sort of cost-wise. Painting skills, Aelves do have a bit of paint skill required to them. There's a lot of fine details all over their armor and all over their weaponry and all over the mounts as well, though the mounts definitely have the ability to take some simple methods easy, thanks to large scales and large flat areas on them. Things like the Leviathan and stuff like that can be painted really easily, but you do have some really intricate kits like the Eidolons of Matlan and some of the character models as well, so painting can be a little bit middling and maybe a little bit more on the difficult than easy side. The army does have a couple of ways to play, though it is most dominantly known for the eel spam style lists. So while you have a few options, definitely the eel list is by far the most competitive build. This leads into ease of play. The army, when you've got eels, is all about that alpha strike, and is a little bit, I guess, singular in how it plays at times. So playing with Aelves, you've got a bunch of tools, you do have a limited roster. This can make ease of play not the most simple one if you're trying to build more versatile lists than just simply run forward and charge with your eels and do damage. The competitiveness of the army has always been good. Aelves are a solidly competitive army. They've got some cool allegiance abilities and stuff like that that allow them just to continuously float at that good sort of level within the meta. At times they can be really, really strong, and at times, the worst of times for Aelves, they're just generally a decent army at worst. Next, we have the Lumineth Realm Lords. Now, Lumineth Realm Lords do not have a start collecting box. I am apologising before because I'm going to say a lot of things that are probably in the more negative of starting with this army. Model count for Lumineth Realm Lords can be around the middle. This is probably one of the best things going for them. They don't have an awful lot of models on the table. Generally, you're going to be around that 50-60 mark in the more elite, the more horde style versions of the army, and the elite versions of the army can be much, much, much lower. The cost of the army for Lumineth Realm Lords is a little bit on the expensive side. Generally, most of these kits cost more than their comparisons from other armies, which can be a little bit of an issue. With no star collecting box, the army can be quite expensive to get into initially. The lack of summoning is definitely a bonus for the Lumineth Realm Lords. They don't have any, which is really nice, meaning, you know, that high cost of models is sort of brought down compared to some of the summoning armies. The painting skills required for the army definitely are a lot more intricate. There's a lot of intricate detail on a lot of the miniatures within the force that can make painting them a little bit of a daunting task. But if you're brand new to painting, they're definitely start on some of the more warrior style troops in the army and move your way onto the other more intricate elite style troops and your monsters and your heroes afterwards, after you've practiced a little bit on those basic sort of infantry. The army does have multiple ways to play. It's got three main parts of it at the moment: the Huracan, the Alarith, and the Venari, and each of them offers different ways to play. What's really cool about Lumineth is you can build into all of these individually, or you can play a mixed arms army with bits and pieces of both of them coming together in your one final army, which really makes for an interesting way to play. There's also the great part where some of the sub-factions play with the same type of units, but give them different ways to play. Venari are especially useful in this, where there's different builds of Venari based on what sort of sub-faction you're playing with those units. The ease of play for the army is definitely something they have going for against them. There's a lot of extra rules to remember. There's a lot of magic happening, so a lot of different spells needed to require. And the army generally just has a lot of bookkeeping, from magic to Aether Quartz to all the different abilities that all the different units can do. There's a lot of rules throughout the army that can make it a little bit overbearing. Definitely, if you're getting into this army, start basic, start running smaller games to learn your units one by one, chopping and changing them out. And definitely check out AOS reminders for some fantastic ways to help you remember all the rules you have for this army. Competitiveness for the army, though, the army is really competitive. Sentinels are one of the best units in the game, and Teclis is probably the best magic user in the entire game, so you've got a really solid competitive army here that can do a lot. There's also some really obscene and really dirty tricks you can do with the Huracan Spirit of the Winds that really make for some frustrating games for your opponents. You've definitely got a bunch of different ways to play competitively, as well as just friendly games as well. And lastly, for the elves, we have the Sylvaneth. They have a star collecting box, and honestly, I really like it. I think it's one of the better ones. The giant monster kit in it, the Tree Lord, has 3 different variations. You could easily buy 3 of the star collecting box, build each different Tree Lord option, and have a solid army for your Sylvaneth. What's great about it as well is it gives you Dryads, it gives you the Branch Witch, which you could easily convert one into a Branch Wraith, although you get extra Dryad models inside the box to convert into some Branch Wraiths if you want as well, which make for a fantastic starter set for this army. The model count of the army can range quite varyingly. You can have 50 model armies, you can have 20 model armies, depending on what sort of build you want to run, which is great because the 20 model armies are generally the ones not inside starter boxes, so if you're wanting to build more infantry heavy armies, you actually get them inside the star collecting box, which makes them much cheaper to buy. The cost of the army for Sylvaneth is pretty solid. It's not the most expensive army and not the cheapest one either, though Dryads are pretty cheap for the amount of models you get, which is nice, and your Revenants and your Kurnoth Hunters compared to similar units are definitely not as expensive. The lack of summoning isn't always apparent in the army. You do have some, but very minimal. Your Branch Wraiths can summon small units of Dryads, and Alariel can once per game do some summoning as well. So you've not got a lot of summoning to worry about, which isn't a big factor, so that's definitely a cost. However, this army has one summoning thing that is, I guess, a little bit of an issue, and that is the trees. You're required to buy the trees, and the trees is so important in how the army plays that you definitely need to purchase multiple of those Sylvaneth Wildwoods to get the trees for your army to play properly on the tabletop. So that is definitely a mark against it. There is no other army that relies on its terrain as much as the Sylvaneth do. Painting skills, this army paints really easy. You can go with very basic techniques, or you can go with really advanced techniques on a bunch of the other models as well, which is great. So there's a ton of different models and different paint styles you can do, and really do anything from basic stuff to what some of the most advanced stuff you can think of. Multiple ways to play is, as we mentioned, certainly possible with this army. You can go Revenant heavy, you can go Monster heavy, you can go Dryad heavy, you can go Kurnoth Hunter heavy, and you can play with a mix. So there's definitely options here for a bunch of different ways to play with this army. Ease of play is maybe not the easiest. The army isn't the most strongest in the competitive scene. It does have loads of different ways to play, but you need to really know the army well to get the most out of it. So it's definitely building around some tricks and some cool little combos that make the army as powerful as it can be. So you definitely need to know those little tricks and combos and learn that sort of stuff to really get the most out of this army. So it's not the most easy to play, but it does paint up really, really well. And it does, I guess, have a bit of a mixed bag. The fact it needs more terrain than other armies, but it's not the most expensive model-wise than others, is, you know, a bit of a bit in forward. Sylvaneth definitely aren't one of the worst, but they aren't one of the best armies to start with in the game. Well, that's the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And while you're at it, drop us a comment below in the comment section and let us know what you enjoyed about the video. If you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our fine little community here at Cinderful Gaming, you can do so by following the link in the video's description to our Discord server. Lastly, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who supports the channel via Patreon and YouTube members, and you can go help support the channel via Patreon and YouTube members as well and get access to, if you're a YouTube member, some of our awesome little gifts or get choice of what we're going to do for content on the channel. You can follow those links in the description of the video to Patreon and YouTube members. But a shout out to them all, our Patreons: Christian Weir, James Soren, Greenskins Gaming, AJC, Kenny Lyle, Outer and Shot First, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, The Rising Ape, Cure Dynamic, Agu, Anthony B, Anton Nilsson, JJ Austrian, Average Wargamer, Domir, Mark Harvey, and James Cater. And to our YouTube members as well, a special shout out to Green Roots Gaming, Kenton Young, Chris Wallace, Aronya, Vinny, Lockloric, The Johnny84, David Ellsworth, Revenar, Wolfric Nick, and Broken Chef. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out first of all to Lady Witchvox Art, who does all the amazing artwork for the channel that you see here, and to Xmorphic, who does all the amazing work and the background work for our Discord server. Thank you both very much for all your help. That's it for today though, everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.